Good afternoon from Bangkok to all our viewers joining us in this special SPAFA SESH on Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs in short, climate action and culture. We've missed you as it has been a while since our last SPAFA SESH, as we've been busy conducting face-to-face events. This SESH is special because it is a collaboration with one of our newly established sister SEAMEO centers, the SEAMEO Regional Centre for Sufficiency Economy Philosophy for Sustainability, or SEAMEO SEPS, whose mandate is to promote the philosophy, principles, and values of the sufficiency economy as an instrument for achieving sustainable development goals. So SEAMEO SEPS actually approached SPAFA to be part of their webinar series on SDGs. So in continuation from session 1, which provided the fundamental concepts of SDGs in both theory and practice, focusing on school and community. Today, we are joined by 3 distinguished speakers for session 2, who will share their experiences relating to SDGs from cultural perspectives. Another reason for this SPAFA SESH being special is that this is the first time that SPAFA SESH is broadcasting on YouTube Live. So hello to our viewers on both SPAFA's YouTube channel and Facebook page. Some reminders to our viewers, as it has been a while. Don't forget, we like hearing from you, so make sure you let us know which part of the world you are joining us from. And don't forget, you could win yourself a SPAFA souvenir by participating in the Q&A, so make sure you send in your questions based on the presentations which you will hear from the speakers. You can leave your questions in the comment section in SPAFA's Facebook and YouTube, and we will get to your questions during the Q&A portion of the SESH. Before introducing our moderator and the 3 speakers for today, please join me in welcoming a very important guest who is none other than SEAMEO SEPS Center Director, Ms. Duria Amatawiwat, to give a welcome address. Good afternoon, Kunduria.
Good afternoon, John. Thank you very much for your introduction. Good day to all participants today webinar. First, I would like to thank for joining us today, and this is all part of our learning series. Normally, we at the SEAMEO SEP, we organize the session like this, and this is our second session in the what we call SEP-SDGs in Action virtual learning series on SDGs. As we see that the collaboration among us, I mean SEAMEO SEP and SPAFA, is very useful, and it shows the collaborative for the moving towards to the sustainability, which is one of our mandate. The SEAMEO SEP, we highlight the sustainability. That is why our center names, we use the Regional Centre of Sufficiency Economy Philosophy for Sustainability as the vehicle, the SEP, the philosophy as the vehicle, one of the vehicles to achieve the sustainability. And I'm delighted to be here with all of you today, this afternoon. As we see culture is essential to sustainable development, we see that it could shape our values, our behaviors, and our relationship with the natural world. Cultural heritage side practices and traditions can play a vital role in climate change, helping us to adapt to the impacts of climate change, mitigate greenhouse gas emission, and bioresilience. And for example, traditional knowledge and practices can help us to manage water resources more effectively, build sustainable homes, and develop renewable energy sources. Cultural heritage sites can also serve as educational resources, raising awareness of climate change and inspiring people to take action. So during this session, I believe that you will learn from our distinguished speakers' input, which have been designed to provide you with the overview and explanation of the roles of cultures in SDGs, especially in relation to climate change or climate action. Showcase of some practices and professionals in the cultural heritage sector in response to SDG, and as well as give you some kind of introduction to the toolkit entitled Living with Water Heritage and Risk, an educator's toolkit for global citizenship, which is a teaching tool being conceptualized with pedagogical principles found in the spheres of global citizenship education, sustainable development goals, intangible cultural heritage, and disaster risk management. So this webinar series will provide you with a good opportunity to learn more about the role of culture in the SDGs and climate action. Without further delay, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our speaker, Henry, Gabriel, and Karen, for your kind accepting to be our speaker and be part of this learning session. And I would like also to thank Dr. Kemachat and his team from SEAMEO SPAFA for your collaboration in making this learning session happen. So I would like to thank all of you once again for joining us today. Thank you very much. I give the floor back to John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kunduria, for your welcome remarks. And as this is a collaboration between SEAMEO SEPS and SEAMEO SPAFA, please join me now in welcoming the director of SEAMEO SPAFA, Mr. Kemachat Tepchai, to give his welcome remarks. Good afternoon, Director Kemachat.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, SEAMEO SEPS Director Kunduria, distinguished speakers, and all our viewers joining us online on the SPAFA's Facebook and YouTube channel. SEAMEO SPAFA, the Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts, excited to be invited to collaborate in the activity with SEAMEO SEPS, our younger sister of SEAMEO Center, also based in Bangkok, Thailand. In this collaboration, we explore the relationships between culture and sustainability, which align the core mandates and both centers. Compared to other sectors, the role of the cultural sector in SDGs implementation seems somewhat limited. However, sustainability may not be achieved without considering the importance of influence of culture, which underpins the foundation of humanity and its civilization. Therefore, in these sessions, we aim to provide an overview of how the cultural sector and its practitioners contribute to the realization of the SDGs. I hope all of the viewers today will learn a great deal from our distinguished speakers, and that this webinar is just the beginning of many more collaborations to come in the near future between SEAMEO SPAFA and SEAMEO SEPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kemachat, for your welcome remarks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may I please introduce you to today's moderator, who is none other than SEAMEO SPAFA's Senior Specialist in Cultural Heritage Management, Dr. Hataya Siripatanakun. Hello, PM. PM is her nickname.
Hello, thank you, John, for introducing me, and good afternoon, everyone who is here with us in Southeast Asia and our neighboring regions. And good morning and perhaps good evening to others from the rest of the world. Today, it is my great honor to be a moderator for our three wonderful speakers, Henry McGee, Gabriel Caballero, and Karen Shin. Due to time limitation, we will let the speakers deliver their presentations consecutively. Then there will be a Q&A opportunity for the viewers. May I repeat what John just mentioned once again? While the speakers are presenting, you can post your questions into the chat box or comment box. Our staff will compile the questions for the Q&A later on. And please let us know if the question is specific to any speakers, or we will consider the questions for all speakers. Let's start from our first speaker, Henry Mackey. Henry has a background as an ecologist, museum curator, and manager. He set up Curating Tomorrow, very exciting, in 2019 to help empower museums and museum workers to contribute more effectively to a range of sustainable development agendas, including the SDGs, climate action, biodiversity conservation, human rights, and disaster risk reduction. He also writes a series of open access guides on these topics that are widely used. He has collaborated with the UN Climate Change and spoken at Climate COPs. He was a member of the team behind Reimagining Museums for Climate Action, a major AHRC or Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project with a competition and exhibitions at COP26, and that produced a number of resources for the museum sector. But actually, it's not really limited. Even I'm not the museum workers, I can also use the resources that Henry developed. So today, he will give a presentation on climate, SDGs culture, bringing agendas together as one program for positive change. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Henry. So Henry, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hatia, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So as Hatia mentioned, I'm going to talk about how we can think about these sometimes different competing agendas, particularly for people who are less familiar with them. They can get confused. Which one should they work on? Should it be climate? Should it be SDGs? Should it be something else? So what I'm going to try and talk about together is how can we see these things as one program together? And as Hatia mentioned, I write a series of guides, open access guides, to try to help museums and similar institutions to understand the parts that they can play, and to give them some hopefully fairly simple ways to take part in sustainable development. So these are just the covers of the series of guides that I write. And they can seem to be about quite different topics, but you know, as we know, if we work on sustainable development, these things are all connected. We cannot deal with one problem without at least checking that we're not creating a problem for someone else. And so you can get any of these from my website. They aim to be helpful. And in terms of climate, just to mention that, there are two guides there on the bottom, the Mobilizing Museums for Climate Action with the kind of pink cover. That was the one that we developed from the big project for COP26 back in 2021. The one on the bottom there with the kind of tartan cloth looking cover is for a program called Action for Climate Empowerment, which is the name of the public-facing and all of society parts of the Paris Agreement and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And although this program is over 30 years old, still rather few people have heard of it. And it's an absolutely terrific framework, and it's just ready-made, waiting for us to use. So anyone who wants to take part and contribute to the Paris Agreement very directly, Action for Climate Empowerment is a good start. And the cover on the bottom right there is the latest guide, which isn't even quite finished yet. It's called Localizing the SDGs through Museums and Libraries. And that comes from a big project that was between 5 countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Georgia, and Moldova. And we just had a conference about this last week in Latvia, and that guide should be ready in mid-November. And so what I'm going to talk about are some pitfalls, what kind of like traps that people can easily fall into when they're working with sustainability in museums. And then I'll move to make some recommendations on how to contribute to sustainable development effectively from the perspective of cultural institutions. And so I'll just go through these in turn, because these are 10 kind of, let's call them mistakes or accidents that people can end up making. And the first one I would say of these is what we can call cherry picking, where people pick out the SDGs that they are good at, already good at, and then they ignore the ones that they're not good at. But with sustainable development, we have to do both things. We have to strengthen our positives, and we also have to reduce the negative impacts we make, because we also make negative impacts. The second one is about getting stuck in definitions. So you find very often in discussions on sustainability or sustainable development that people have a different topic in their head. So people will be, a group of people talking about sustainability. One is talking about the sustainability of the budget. One is talking about the sustainability of the building. One is talking about the sustainability of how hard they work, and many other things. And that just means that people are not even really talking about the same thing. That's rather hard to move forward from. And the third one is about what we can call business as usual, where institutions use the SDGs just to talk about what they are already good at. And you can think that people almost use them like a marketing tool, and sometimes they get used as for competition. And that to me doesn't sound quite what they're trying to achieve. Sustainable development requires all of us to change. It requires all of us to understand the difference that we want to make, the difference that we are making, where we're trying to get to work together to achieve better results that work for more people and for nature as well. And then the fourth one we can call greenwashing or SDG washing. And so in the business sector has had corporate social responsibility reporting for 30 years, because the business sector realized it had a pretty bad reputation, and so it needed to demonstrate that it was trying to do the right thing. The cultural sector hasn't been under as much pressure, because people would often think that culture is kind of a good thing. Visiting museums and libraries is a good thing, but it also has negative impacts, and we need to be honest about those impacts. And we also can't just balance the harm that we do in one aspect against the good in another, which I'll talk about more. And we can see often in projects that are about sustainability or sustainable development that they continue to be in silos, where people would say, oh, this is a project about social responsibility or social sustainability, or this is a project about environmental sustainability, but it's not always that you find projects that at least think about both things. And so because sustainable development is trying to achieve a better balance of considerations of people, planet, and prosperity, we should be thinking about how to bring more of the social aspects into our environmental work and more of the environmental aspects into our social work to create this more harmonious balance. And then the sixth one of these I mentioned briefly before. We can think, I call accepting the unacceptable, and we can think about this in cultural institutions, where if you think of like a seesaw, a children's seesaw, where institutions, they balance the social good they do against the environmental harm. So it's as if it's okay to harm the environment a bit because it creates positive social impact. When we work with sustainable development, we're trying to enhance both the social benefit and the environmental benefit. We're trying not to make that trade-off. And then the seventh one, we could say, is almost like using sustainability as a way to get money, let's say, put it that way, to justify unsustainable growth of galleries, libraries, archives, or museums. For instance, by saying, we will build a new museum, And it will be great for the planet because it will educate more people about the environment, let's put it that way, or climate change. That's quite rather dangerous because it's very easy to measure what the carbon footprint, let's put it that way, of building the museum would be. It's very hard to demonstrate how that institution changed people's carbon footprint, you know, the work of the public. So we should be very careful that we aren't just putting responsibility onto other people while we may behave in a rather irresponsible way. And the eighth one, I would say, is about unclear terminology. And we find this very much certainly in the museum sector in the UK, is that these words like ecological or green or sustainable, environment and eco, they are very much overused. So we can hear people talk about this is a sustainable exhibition, but without always much of an explanation of how it is better than what they did before and how it's different from what they will do in the future. So we should use words in a careful way, or we should at least define what we mean by them when we're talking about them. Otherwise, we risk not being understood. And again, using sustainability in a competitive way. So for me, sustainable development needs a broad crowd with many voices, many different voices, coming up with many ideas, different ideas, and deciding together. There cannot be one winner. You know, we all win or we all lose. So, but we do find this, unfortunately, because often projects require funding, project funding, and it kind of pushes people to behave in a competitive way. So I'm rather resistant to when people talk about being the first or the biggest or the leader to do with anything to do with sustainable development or the most sustainable, whatever that means, because I'm not quite sure what that means. And the last would be to say the last of these 10 kind of things that trip people up are thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals as an add-on activity, as if there's what you already do, and then you decide to do the SDGs as a kind of project. That's not quite how to use them at all. And so I'll move to make a few remarks about the agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, because just from what I see, they are often misunderstood. And partly this is also the fault of the way they are presented, because if people are familiar with anything, it is like what I have a flag on my wall. You probably can't see that just now. The picture, which is on the right-hand side there, of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Many people are only familiar with that, but it's only a picture. It doesn't really make sense without reference to the document, to transforming our world, or what that is trying to achieve. And because the way the SDGs are presented there, it looks like 17 separate boxes, kind of encourages people to think of them as 17 separate boxes, rather than a circle of, equal things that we need to work. We need to work this stuff out, and we need to identify the trade-offs between them and get rid of those trade-offs. And a few remarks to say would be that many people think of the SDGs as if they are a new thing, but that's not really true, because they're the latest attempt to achieve things, that people have tried to do in the past over the last 50 years since 1972. So we can say that the SDGs are just really, they bring together all of the existing agreements, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the other main human rights agreements, and the main environmental agreements into one program. And that's a really important thing, because thinking of those things separately doesn't really work, because in answering one of them, you might just be creating a problem somewhere else. But people are often not so familiar that this is just a new way of achieving the things that governments were supposed to do, but they have not succeeded in doing. Recognizing we need all people, all communities, all ideas, all voices to be brought into this. And a few other remarks I would make would be like what I see in Europe and in North America as well, is that when people talk about sustainability, very often they're thinking about the environment. They might be thinking about climate, and these things, they get talked about as if they are the same thing. Climate equals sustainability, equals environment, equals sustainable development. Those are really different things. So even talking about sustainability and sustainable development, those two get confused very much. As I mentioned, like in Europe and North America, sustainability very often becomes, how do we use natural resources carefully? That's a very limited way of thinking about it. Sustainable development is about human rights and protecting and restoring the environment together. It's about those two things, bringing those two things together. And so the best way also to think about it is the well-known, the 5 Ps, but also we should think about the 5 Ps properly, because although it's easy to say, oh, well, the 5 Ps are people, prosperity, peace, partnership, and the planet, that's just the short way of thinking about it. We see here that these are actually 5 actions we need to try and we need to work to end poverty and hunger in all their forms and ensure dignity and equality, and so on for all of the 5 Ps. They're not just concepts, they're things that we need to do. We need to act to do these things, and that is the basis for sustainable development. And so I work with a framework that I put together back in 2019 to try to, you could think of it as localizing the SDGs to museums, who I mostly work with. And I spent a lot of time in 2019 thinking, well, what are the main ways that museums can contribute to sustainable development, to strengthen their positives and to reduce and hopefully eliminate their negatives. So I use this framework to protect and safeguard cultural and natural heritage, education for sustainable development, promoting cultural participation for everyone, both as a human right in itself and because we also have opportunities for cultural participation to bring people into current affairs, public affairs, to support sustainable tourism, to support research for sustainable outcomes, and making sure that both our internal management and our external partnerships and collaborations are directed towards the SDGs. And so, but that's just a kind of theory, you know, that's a model. And I was interested in exploring how can we bring this to life? Because when we talk about culture and the SDGs, we can't just think of it as using the cultural sector as a slightly blunt tool from governments to deliver government's promises. Culture is a very complex term, which means different things to different people. And so we can also think about culture in the senses of high culture, you know, museums and galleries, mass culture, even mass consumption, the anthropological sense of culture as everything. Again, we need to be careful in what sense we are meaning. And we can see also that cultural differences make different connections to sustainable development. So here I'll talk about mostly about Japan, which I visited in March as part of my Churchill Fellowship, where the tradition or the approach to culture and heritage is very different to what it is here in the UK where I am based. Here, culture and heritage are very much rooted in history, the idea of history, often looking back to a better time, although it wasn't necessarily a better time. Whereas if we contrast that with like Latvia, where I was last week, culture, in terms of culture, intangible cultural heritage is much more visible and valued and important there than it is here. And in Japan, again, you see many like very, very different approaches about a much stronger sense of commemorating and respecting the events of the past. In terms of disaster risk reduction, which I was looking at, it's very much in terms of commemorating the victims and those who suffered losses in the past, sometimes their lives, learning the lessons to be prepared for the present and the future. That's really different to here. That's a very practical approach. And then, so I'll just go through, like I have 10 recommendations, which I'll go through just quite quickly, and then we can talk about them afterwards. And these were based on both my work here in the UK and in different countries, and what I was looking at in Japan. And so the first one I would say would be, like in terms of museums, would be to connect museum work with sustainable development agendas and approaches more concretely, because in the UK, the SDGs have a rather low profile, at least in some parts of it. And how we can bring these sustainable development approaches, the SDGs, human rights and rights-based approaches, action for climate empowerment, which I mentioned before, other programs that relate to, the real world, to bring them much more into the work and thinking of museum work and in other cultural institutions. The second one would be to say that it's just not enough to say that we support sustainable development or we support sustainability. We need to have really clear goals, and they need to be backed up with plans and mechanisms for reporting and communication. This both helps us to be, ambitious, honest, committed, make sure that we support, public trust, that if we say we're going to do something, we do it. This would seem to me to be a pretty good approach. But we shouldn't use sustainability or sustainable development just as a marketing tool. We should use it as a practical tool to communicate both our successes and our challenges. This is where we've got to, but this is what else we need to do. It shows that we're not trying to say that we're great, but we are committed. We're trying to do this stuff. The third one, this is the very well-known phrase about thinking global and acting local. And the way I think about this is helping people and communities to understand and have opportunities to play a part in the bigger picture, whether it's things like the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, a Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, or different international days. And we can think about that this isn't just about taking these big, rather high level things and kind of forcing them into the cultural sector. This is about also lifting up the voices and ideas of people and communities so that they can participate in wider sustainable development. The fourth one is to use the outcomes of some of these big conferences, political summits that we have with their work programs, because we do have practical work programs for these different agreements, and to actually use them. So like the Glasgow Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment was agreed in 2021 at COP26. It even mentions the role of museums, the importance of education, training, public awareness, public participation, and a few other things. These are things that they're not just ideas, they're things that we can use to plan and to deliver action, and also to show what we do. And a fifth one would be to say that, as I mentioned before, bringing people, social and environmental considerations together is really a very strong basis for sustainable development. So restoring nature is good for people and communities, and also for nature. If we involve people in environmental action, people who are from different backgrounds, different cultural groups, at risk of tension or conflict between them, promotes mutual understanding, brings us together, and it also helps to act for nature. And also restoring nature helps us to get away from the often rather heavy discussion that there is with climate change, which very much becomes about, you need to stop doing this and stop doing that, and stop doing the next thing, but it's not always so clear what it is you're supposed to do instead. Restoring nature is also a nice positive approach that we also can do. So the sixth one here would be to say that to recognise the potential of culture and heritage as both tools and opportunities to empower people to take part in environmental action, reducing disaster risk, or in wider sustainable development. But I'm also not inclined just to think that culture is all good things in the world and the rather negative aspects we just kind of ignore. Culture and heritage have the potential to do good, and in many cases they are doing good, but they can also be a barrier to action. We can have unhelpful ideas about culture and heritage, often connected with, let's say, incomplete understandings of history or the past, or prejudices. So we can also say that culture and heritage, unfortunately, can also be a barrier to change. So as with many ideas in sustainability and sustainable development, it's a tension between keeping things the same and making sure that they change in a positive way over time. That's also not so easy. The seventh one would be to make use of museums and other similar institutions as both a kind of information centre for top-down information and a platform for bottom-up for sustainable development, human rights, environmental information, and disaster risk information. And I can give you the example would be that if everyone is entitled by right to know the risks that they and their families and their property face, but at least here in the UK, we just don't have that information. It's not, we just don't have it. It's different in different countries. And the eighth one would be to say, to make sure that activity is rights-based in acknowledging that people have their own ideas, aspirations and goals, both individually and collectively, and to avoid coercive programming, trying to force people to do things. And personally, I don't like any discussion that is like trying to change people's behavior, because that's not really cultural activity, that's public administration or something else. So if we approach this with the idea that people are not just waiting to be told what to do, they have their own ideas. People are full of ideas. They should have opportunities to share them and to create them. And so we can also say that, well, people also have well-established rights regarding environmental matters, disaster risk reduction. So we should undertake activity, including cultural activity, that both respects and fulfills these rights, and actually protects these rights as well. Respects, protects, and fulfills. The ninth one would be to make sure that museum activities or other cultural activities are appropriate and they serve the needs of people, communities, and contexts. That they're not only based on what the cultural institution wants, that they're also based on, well, what is it that society wants and needs as well? So that, of course, involves discussion with people, that we don't just think of a kind of production line where cultural institutions make things that people then use further down the line. We should try to make sure that we're in a much stronger conversation. And lastly, that if I talk here about disaster risk reduction, because it's very closely related to sustainable development, that in disaster risk reduction, it's often thought of as being a need to balance the need to forget after a disaster and to remember. But in addition to these, it's also important to create opportunities to imagine and develop alternative options for desired future states. What is the future that we want? And who are we anyway? And how can we make sure that everyone is involved in this? But we can say that as disaster situations, which unfortunately are far too common, are in many ways too late to develop these ideas because people's thinking is reduced, we need to do so in advance. We need to create lots of opportunities to create these ideas of what is it that we want to do, so that if the worst happens, we have a plan ready, or we at least have some ideas. And so I'll just mention a project that I work on briefly called Our Collections Matter, which is a project from ICROM, an intergovernmental organization based in Rome. And we have this online toolkit, which has over 400 really good tools that anyone in the collections-based institutions can use. And I just wanted to mention this because, you know, we have the concepts, we have the commitment, we know what it is we want to do, but the tools already exist. We just maybe need a little bit of help to find them and to make use of them. And just these are my contact details, and I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards. So thank you for your attention. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for your excellent presentation. As a starting speaker, it's really broadened our idea about SDGs in overview. I remember that for Museum Institute, when we start working on SDG, many cultural institutes also try to what you call pick up a bunch of cherry, but ICOM states that ICOM will support everyone to achieve all goals. So actually, for me, it's quite impressive. Instead of trying to achieve only one goals, but for ICOM, it's really supportive and not, as you mentioned, not pick up any specific one, which it's impossible to achieve the sustainability with only one goals. So there are actually some questions, but we will come back to Henry after we finish the presentation. So thank you, Henry, for now. May I move to the next speaker? Hi, Gabriel, our next speaker. He is of, let me pronounce your name more properly. Gabriel Caballero. He is a focal point of ICOMOS, or International Council on Monuments and Sites, Sustainable Development Goals Working Group. We call this group ICOMOS SDG Working Group in brief. So be like easier. Having a background in landscape architecture like me, Gabriel is also contributing to the International Scientific Committee on Cultural Landscapes. And as a focal point of ICOMOS SDGs Working Group, Gab acts as a facilitator and coordinator for ICOMOS work in relation to the global sustainable development policy arena. He develops ideas and monitors progress to support ICOMOS members or ICOMOS groups in the implementation of the ICOMOS action plan for cultural heritage, as well as localizing the sustainable development goals, and coordinates the strategic dissemination of information for the wider public and the policy community outside the heritage sector. Excitedly, in 2022, he also represented ICOMOS at the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, and continues to advocate for culture to be an independent goal for sustainable development beyond 2030. Today, he will share a presentation on engaging young people on linking culture, heritage in achieving the global goals. Actually, I have a chance to look at his presentation earlier, so I can say it's really interesting and will be beneficial to anyone. Gabs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Taya. So let me share my screen. And then I'll just do a full screen. So, Sawadee Krap, everyone. Good afternoon to our colleagues in Thailand and the rest of Southeast Asia, and good morning and good evening to all our international participants. Thank you again to Hataya, Mesa, and the whole of SEAMEO SPAFA for inviting me to this webinar and the topic of the SDGs, climate action and culture. And it's good to speak to after Henry, because we had actually a discussion before with Ikram that he highlighted earlier. The title of my presentation is Engaging Young People on Linking Culture, Heritage, and Achieving the Global Goals. Before I begin, let me introduce the ICOMOS Sustainable Development Goals Working Group, or the SDGs Working Group, which I represent. Established as an interdisciplinary task force by the ICOMOS Scientific Council during the 18th General Assembly in 2014, the SDGs working group coordinates the work of ICOMOS in response to Agenda 2030 through advocacy, policy, and localizing of the SDGs. Our working group acts as a platform for recognition and mainstreaming the effective contribution.
Yep. Excuse me, may I interrupt you? Perhaps because the screen that we are seeing, it showed the your script as well.
Oh yeah. So let me do this. Display settings and see swap screen. Can you see that?
Perhaps you can. Is that
Stop
all right?
share. Let me do that again.
Okay. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Oh wait. Okay. Oh wait. Let me do that again. I think I got confused with this.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see that. And share screen. And then display settings. Stop screen. Is it? You see the screen correctly or?
Yes.
Oh
yeah.
no. It's.
Excellent. Yeah.
You're correct. Is it correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a bit disorientated. Okay, but let me do this. Hold on. But the working group is has been there since 2014, and afterwards there's been different focal points. And as you can see on the right, are different activities that we've done since 2017 to now. We've gone to the HLPF. And we go to UN Habitat. We represent ourselves in the ICOMOS and the World Heritage Committee meetings, as it was highlighted earlier. We went to the Monde Cold Conference, and just recently we also did activities in Sydney in 2023 for our General Assembly. So I think if you are familiar with SDGs, there is one target that is focusing on heritage, which is target 11.4. And that is really looking at strengthening the efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. However, this process of defining this goal, in the beginning, culture and heritage was the bigger conversation. And through the process of the United Nations and defining the different goals, that has been squeezed. Culture and heritage has been squeezed to one singular target, which is that target 11.4. But we continue to recognize that the SDGs, or culture and heritage, cannot be boxed into this one small target, and it contributes to all the 17 goals. In 2021, ICOMOS actually released this document called Heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a policy guidance which is a first and key step in illustrating the positive contribution of heritage to all the SDGs. It provides different challenges and points where heritage practices might be at odds with some principles from the SDGs. And it was quite a simple document. It provides baseline data, policy statements of what everyone can do, different actors can do, and recommendations with illustrated examples of different heritage sites around the world, of how contributions can be done by heritage to all various SDGs. Now, in 2022, at the end of 2022, I was quite inspired actually what Henry was saying, because of looking at all the different SDGs, and we did that for our working group. And we realized that much of the effort that we've been doing is really anchored to SDG 11. 21% of the work that we do actually is focused on sustainable cities and communities. There's a lot of work that is being done for climate action and education. But we also recognize that not much of the work has been focused on the basic needs, or on addressing how can heritage engage with poverty and hunger. And that is something that we have to look at. We have also identified different challenges. There are a lot of issues of funding. There's a limited support. Engaging with the right stakeholder is also a question. Who is the right person to speak to in these things? A lot of people are unaware of the right stakeholders. And we see certain opportunities as well. Okay, hold on. Let me, I think it's going back to a different, are you okay? Can you see my screen correctly?
Not actually, Gab. It's go back to the two screen.
Wait.
Between, yeah.
Okay, let me try again, yeah?
Yes.
This is like getting very,
yeah.
wait.
We can also use your PDF if you wish. Let us know.
Okay, let me see if this doesn't work, then just let me know, yeah? Wait a second. Okay, I think I need some help then because it's not doing anything now. If you can do the PDF, and then that will be better to share.
Okay, we will share your PDF. But then for the video clip, you
That's
can
fine.
you can just notify us that you may share that part yourself later.
That's fine. Yeah. So we can go to the I think it's in page 5 now. Right. So as I was saying earlier, that we saw different challenges that how our colleagues from the heritage sector are not able to engage in with the right people. They didn't know how to interact, who to interact, who are the communities that are looking at the SDGs. But they're also learning opportunities that was identified, which is more work can be done on gender equality, and intersectionality, and looking beyond the box of heritage and looking at different aspects of sustainable development, and how does and also culture, and how does heritage contribute to a bigger picture. If you go to the next slide, please. What we've done for the ICOMOS Sustainable Development Goals Working Group is to really look into how sustainable thinking can happen at an intergenerational perspective. Part of the work that we did in 2021 was to define the governance mechanisms within our group, and to really anchor that to having intergenerational growth and intergenerational discourse between different colleagues. This is mandated in our terms of reference, which means that our representatives from the national committees, meaning that each country who provides support to the international working group, has to have young people in it as part of the leaders of the group, so that there are always people who are more, let's say, familiar with the topic, but there is also a piece of it that an emerging professional learns along the process of leadership and the profession. We are looking at different kinds of activities internationally, and in my team of 9 task team coordinators, we call them, there are 5 emerging professionals that are leaders, and then there are 4 older professionals, or let's say more mature professionals who are more familiar with the field, who are also leaders. So we always kind of put that mix together. Our programs are looking at youth engagement and capacity building. Many of our teams have internships or mentorships and seminars that are really dedicated to engaging a younger audience, so that they are also quite familiar on how heritage and sustainable development comes together. If you can go to the next slide, please, I can share a little bit more of what ICOMOS Jordan does. So in 2023, ICOMOS Jordan did a university students engagement. What they did was to create a workshop, a thematic workshop, that looks at various components of sustainable development. First one was focus on more of the environment and climate change. Second one was people and sustainable cities. And third one was the economy and partnerships. And what they've done is to really target the youth as part of this initiative. They have captured a lot of people from the architecture, tourism, archaeology, and heritage resources bachelors. What they also did was to use this program called Mentimeter, which allows for an interactive engagement between the practitioners and the facilitators and the students, and their like tasks that were done so that they are more familiar, not just like having a webinar. It really was quite an interactive discussion. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here are just the people that are there. There were a lot of participants, and most of them were coming from Jordan. But if you see on the left, there are other people that are coming from the region as well, from Egypt, from the UAE, from Palestine, and the rest of the Arab region. And most of the people who attended, and this is a webinar, bachelor students were there, graduate students were there as well, and but there are also employees and more emerging professionals that are also quite interested in the topic. If you go to the next slide, I can show what they did. Was that part of this workshop? Because it was online and had a regional, let's say, outlook, right? They created a small challenge for the participants, which is to create a small project, identify different stakeholders in a time frame, and then 3 participants were supposed to win and got a 1-year free membership to the organization. And during that 1-year program or 1-year activity, the winners would develop their own proposals to support the projects that they were thinking of. And that was what that was done by the committee. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. What ICOMOS Philippines does on the other part of the world is to develop a small internship program. This program is looking at 2 parts. One is really engaging with local governments and bring in students to discuss with heritage practitioners, but also with local government units. It's a 5-month program, and what has been done now is there's a series of focus group discussions that were done from 2021 onwards to now, and that is now being synthesized and defining how Philippine heritage and sustainable development comes together. If you can go to the next slide, I will explain that more. So the series of discussions happened in August 2021 to December 2021 that looked at the 5 Ps. And these engagements were talking to local governments, national government agencies, heritage practitioners, and the interns that were there were part of the discourse. They were minuting down what was happening, but also synthesizing the different issues of the 5 Ps. ICOMOS Philippines found that it was quite easy to dissect the conversations to the 5 Ps as a simpler way of conversing. But as Henry has said, of course, it cannot be just one aspect that we look at. It needs to be seen as a bigger perspective. Let's go to the next slide, please. What happened afterwards is that the internship program developed also research that is put into a conference in a publication. So in September 2023 in Sydney, this presentation by Elena Kautish, which is one of the interns from ICOMOS Philippines, was done. It's entitled "In Synthesizing Discourses on Heritage and the SDGs in the Philippines." And the publication or the group the activities that were happening in 2021 is now being synthesized, and by 2024 it will all be released to the public, and what is defined as the policy guidance for Philippine heritage and the SDGs. Let's go to the next slide. The other activity that we've seen as quite effective is what we are doing now as translations. Now, in the beginning, we thought it was quite a simple task, translating the document to different languages. But what we did during that process was to engage different language groups and different countries, so that the translations are very well integrated to various, let's say, countries. So the first translation that you see on the left is a collaborative work between ICOMOS Portugal and Brazil. The nuances of the language had to be resolved and identified as what is the right or appropriate language to be used for certain topics. But it was also a means of understanding each other and understanding the different terminologies that works for a bigger audience. What the ICOMOS Brazil and Portugal also did was to conduct a workshop afterwards with students to explain how heritage and sustainable development comes together, and in the classroom. And of course, that became a deeper conversation on how this is really in practice. ICOMOS, the Arab region, what they did was a collaborative work between different countries, and similar to Portugal and Brazil, the use of the language of Arabic was used, but again, nuances of what is defined as heritage and sustainable development in that kind of context was also discussed. This will now, in 2024, a deeper conversation will happen, and projects will be done collaboratively with the region, and which is sponsored by ICOMOS Jordan. Let me go to the next slide, and so that we don't lose time with the video, I will just explain what this is. In 2022, what we've done is we collaborated with our ICOMOS Emerging Professionals Working Group, which is a group of young professionals in ICOMOS who are really looking into the different parts of the organization. And we told them that we are going to this conference in Mondiacult in Mexico, and what are their thoughts on cultural policies for the future. So a webinar was created. They created their own perspectives, understanding what they believe as the most important things for cultural policies in that future that we all will be sharing. And the video was actually just to explain what they believed as the important things that young people have for cultural policies in the coming future. I will go to last two slides, if I may. With regards to climate action, we also have been looking at how this comes together in relation to the SDGs and World Heritage Sites. Two interns have come in from the US ICOMOS International Exchange Program that I've worked with, and we've identified 6 World Heritage Sites and identified as well management systems that have been done by these sites. And we've also mapped out the challenges that many sites on the World Heritage List is encountering with climate change. I won't go into the detail, but it is indeed climate change is really affecting many heritage sites, and sometimes it is not really documented as climate change or impacts of climate change. Sometimes it's just documented as flooding or desertification or different kinds of environmental issues. But when you see the pattern, it is actually in having more and more impacts in the last few years. What we have identified in this research is the inherent connection between the SDGs and climate action, that the climate emergency is also a means to activate a holistic thinking in heritage sites. Management systems need to be seen not just from protecting what we call as the outstanding universal value, but also looking at the bigger picture of economic development, of environmental protection, disaster risk management, and things like that. And SDGs can be a tool to enable that kind of discourse to happen in a more structured manner. Climate action still is an ad hoc activity in many sites, and many sites, heritage sites, are not prepared for the devastation that can happen. And it really needs a lot more training, capacity building for people, so that they look beyond what they are their day-to-day work is, to look at the bigger picture. Sites that have quantifiable frameworks lead to measurable outcomes. So if you are coming from a heritage site, I would suggest that you define specific goals, specific targets that you want to have in the next couple of years, and really track that, because this will be the starting point of you having a means of identifying good outcomes on the social aspect, or economic development aspect, or environmental aspect, whatever it is. If you have a quantifiable framework, that is quite good. And this is the basis of the SDGs. I will go to the last slide, just to share a little bit more of the lessons that we've learned so far in this process. What we have defined or acknowledged is that this is a dynamic process. There's a lot of voices, there's a lot of different priorities, but we need to have the flexibility of mind to change the way that we work, to end focusing on local practices that have an intergenerational component. We cannot have let's say, very strong practitioners that are in the field. We really have to bring young people in, so that there is a longer term thinking on different types of actions. The tools of engagement are emerging. You can do online and offline engagement. It needs to be driven by local languages, and team members are important that can connect the different dots. We need to have people that are very strong in identifying the big agenda, the big patterns. For young people, friendships, of course, are very important. Having fun is an element that needs to be put into these things. And there is also that question of what is the benefit for a young person, right? Learning and creating opportunities for growth is very important for a young person, and that will be keeping people engaged in this process. There is also a need to go beyond the traditional boundaries of work in the cultural sector. If you are coming from the museum sector and looking at collections, or versus managing a heritage site, and you think that that is only the task that you have, there is a bigger question out there. You know, what is the responsibility of practitioners to the bigger issues around it, the bigger society? Whose responsibility is it to enact change? Is it you? Is it your department? Is it the sector? But we have to push that, right? How can young people do? What can young people do to help solve the problems? These are also questions. And lastly, is that data is really, really needed. We have a lot of these ideas in different scattered in different parts of the world, in different cultural, let's say, institutions, but we need to collect them and put them together, so that once it is engaged at the higher level discussions, then it makes sense. You know, guidance on what is needed is very important. So us in the working group, in the SDGs working group, are really looking into that. What kind of data will be needed, not just economics of heritage, but the wider perspective of rights, gender equality, and different things as well. I will end here. I'm sorry for all the trouble that I've created, but if you have any questions, do let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. It's very inspiring, I can say. From your presentation, we can see how important the young people are, and how they will ensure the sustainability of our future. And that's actually, it's a little bit complicated when we try to bring the cultural aspect to SDG and to young people. That's why we invited the third speakers for today, which really perhaps give us some clarification how we try to bring these like, I'm not sure, these issues, the young generation, sustainable development, and also culture together, and why it's important, why we need to do that. So we will come back to Gab and Henry later today. So come to our last speaker, but it's not least as always, my dear Karen. Let me introduce Karen a little bit before we let her share her experience. Karen is a pioneer in interactive museum experiences for children and adults in various museums operated by the National Heritage Board of Singapore, such as Asian Civilization Museum, the Peranakan Museum, the National Museum, and many others. Karen has also worked with the Ministry of Education Singapore on field-based learning guides for primary school students and teachers visiting the different national museums of Singapore. She is currently working with Early Childhood Development Agency and the National Institute of Early Childhood Development to train preschool educators in age-appropriate activities that focus on sustainable development goals and outdoor learning at wildlife parks in Singapore. Karen is a strong advocate for informal learning and has designed award-winning learning resources that have been recognized by many international organizations. That's why in 2019, we, SEAMEO SPAFA, invited her to help us conceptualize and produce the learning resource, namely Living with Water, Heritage and Risk, and Educators Toolkit for Global Citizenship, co-produced and funded by UNESCO FCU based in Korea. Actually, this toolkit is one of the outcomes from our initiative entitled School-Based Approach in Promoting Disaster Risk Management in Southeast Asia, focusing on school communities rather than professional as we did normal. And we organized a workshop in Brunei Darussalam, which is one of the inspiration to develop these toolkits. I think actually there are many things that I would like to mention about Karen, but I think it's better for now to let her speak and share her experience, how we develop these toolkits and how to use it, how it can be benefit to our educators and also anyone who interested in these issues. Karen,
thank you, Hataya.
The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank SEAMEO SPAFA for inviting me together with SEPS. Very timely introduction of the new SEAMEO regional setup. And really want to specifically thank Ms. Hataya for curating the 3 topics, because from a big topic down to about sustainability, down to Gabrielle that talked about youth. Now we're going to dive right into schools, where we're going to talk about how do we bring SDGs to the younger children. Okay, I'll now share my slideshow. Okay, and I owe it to the organizers to tell me if it's in the correct form. Right? Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the making of this toolkit that Hataya has mentioned. Yeah. I hope the slideshow is okay. Yeah,
Yes.
like thank you. Over 200 people have been watching on YouTube. And I'm so heartened to see so many friends from ASEAN inside the Southeast Asian countries inside the YouTube. A little bit about me, I think Hatay has already told you about my museum stint. I'm also working with wildlife parks. But most important of all, I'm a planning advocate. I really believe in learning through play. And you'll see why in the toolkit. And today we're going to explore a little bit about the why, the what, and the how behind this toolkit. So we're going to dive right in. First of all, I want to share with you why the toolkit was created. Yeah, the very most important thing was really for schools, teachers, and students to explore the connection between culture and nature in heritage conservation. They are not separate. And very grateful to Henry for mentioning that a lot of people are working in silos. And this is something that we can observe that it is not possible to separate these two entities. And also I want to, the toolkit is promoting really peaceful and sustainable coexistence with nature, as well as diverse cultures. And the last part, point to youth, we want youth to become critical thinkers, as well as compassionate and ethical decision makers, because like Gabrielle said, they are going to look at the longer term goals that we have. And this toolkit will also help, is trying to help to raise awareness of 2 SDG in particular. You can see here the quality education. We're not just looking at knowledge, but knowledge and skills. And for sustainable development, lifestyles, and Henry talked about human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture, peace, and nonviolence. And EPSIO, which is one of the supporters of this toolkit, talks about global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development. And this target, number 4, it's really linked to SDG target 11.4 about sustainable cities and communities, when we're really talking not just about cultural heritage, but also natural heritage. And these 2 targets actually reinforce each other. And I really get to hear that none of these targets should be taken in isolation. Yeah, but why water heritage? I think water heritage really affords us the opportunity to explore a living culture, because many people in Southeast Asia are still living near or on water. Yeah, and also to discover the environmental concerns that come with living near a water body, and how we can become more aware of risks, hazards, and disasters. So glad to hear the DDR coming out and the school-based disaster prevention being mentioned by Ms. Hataya. And also want schools and children to imagine, not just think about the disasters only, but to imagine what kind of sustainable homes, habitats, and heritage they want to safeguard. And with this, we encourage them to take action as global citizens. So, but personally, like what Ms. Hataya said, there are 3 stories that brought me to this toolkit. The first one is the invitation to go to Brunei to see the largest settlement on stilts. And there we did cultural mapping, and I realized that the cultural mapping of this water heritage is really beyond just culture. There's so many things involved. The economic aspect, the social aspect, and even the everyday concerns of the everyday man. It's all rolled into one as we did the cultural mapping. And secondly, my first research project was in Indonesia, and I fell in love with batik. So I was really very sad when I found out that this particular type of batik that was used to be made in West Java, called the Sepidis, it's actually no longer in such a big production because of the polluted rivers. And this was one point where I thought there's such close relationship between culture and nature. And the third story is, of course, the tsunami, which a lot of us experience, whether personally or indirectly through the media, through social media. And this is also one of the motivating points for me. So how are these sites chosen? Inside the toolkit, there are 5 water heritage that are being selected as the focus. For example, the Halong Bay. was selected because we want to highlight the coexistence of biodiversity and the population there. And sorry for the spelling mistake, we have Inlay Lake in Myanmar. We want to look at the impact of tourism and water festivals there. And of course, the Kampong Ayer in Brunei. We're talking a lot about urbanization that's affecting the largest settlement on stilts. We are also looking at the Moken, which doesn't have a specific site. There are like a nomadic people that are traveling between Magui Archipelago, Myanmar, and Koh Surui in Thailand. Here, we really want to look at tsunami through their eyes and also want to appreciate their oral traditions and also the situation of statelessness for some of them. And Tonle Sap in Cambodia was selected because we could actually zone in on issues like overfishing, deforestation, but also some success stories about reforesting the areas near the water body, near the lake. And we want to pay a bit of attention on the many rituals that were born because of this heavy interdependence with Tonle Sap. Okay. Let me move to the next slide. Well, some common threads. All the themes that I've talked about doesn't only belong to these 5 water heritage sites. Really, a lot of the common threads you can see in any water heritage around the world. We talk about natural, cultural, but also water heritage as an economic asset. We can't deny that millions of people rely on water bodies for their livelihoods, but also the tangible and intangible cultural heritage we can find around these water bodies. And thirdly, the last thread we want to look at is really the risk, the hazards, and some success stories that we can highlight to the school communities. Okay, so this toolkit is really for educators who are teaching children between 7 to 12 years old. You can choose to use them in schools or community centers. You can do it in one subject, or you can choose to combine different subjects. For example, combining social studies with art, or even going on field trips to explore a nearby water heritage or an intangible heritage. Yeah, and just for our audiences online, you'll be happy to know that this toolkit is also available in Khmer, Bahasa Melayu, Myanmar, Thai, and Vietnamese. So what can we find in this toolkit? It's an online toolkit that consists of a booklet, which is to guide the educator in using all these resources inside. There are photo cards, there are different ways of using the photo cards and initiating interesting conversations with children. As Gabriel pointed out, friendship and fun are very important for young people. Okay, and there are also 2 different suggestions, different ideas for teachers to look at not just biodiversity, but also cultural heritage. A bit of surveying here, getting children to know that, hey, who are some stakeholders we can interview? Yeah, all right. But I want to go into the chapters a little bit to tell you what each chapter focuses on. The first chapter really is an introduction about why do we bother to explore water heritage? And for each of the water heritage, we actually have a 1-page card about the water heritage itself. So for example, these are some special features of this information card. The first one would always be about the origin stories of the place name. For example, in this case, Ha Long Bay means descending of the dragons who came to help the Vietnamese people defend the land. We always have the location and the current population, and also what makes the place unique. You know, this place is not just unique for its sightseeing beauty, but also for its big biodiversity. It's a World Heritage Site for both flora, fauna, and also its culture. But most importantly, I feel like I wanted to share with the educators and the children about how the residents there feel about the water heritage. For example, here, the project coordinator for UNDP actually talked about how the heritage of Ha Long Bay is not just the landscape, but also the people. And for chapter 2, we're really talking about what can we learn through water heritage? You know, we can learn about some human-induced hazards, some natural disasters, how it affects people, but also about the intangible cultural heritage that surrounds the people who live there. And the third chapter is about fostering global citizenship, because Henry mentioned about going global, but also taking it local. And this is an interesting chapter because it talks about this framework that we can use for global citizenship. For example, here we talk a very good tool that will be introduced in the toolkit is about this think, share, and act. Yeah, really getting children to think critically about why we need to conserve water heritage as a local, as a regional, but also as a global issue. And also get them to share, get them to imagine a better world where people feel connected to a common humanity. Even though we're so diverse, there are certain risks to heritage that we all share. And thirdly is the tool on ACT. The learners will be encouraged to initiate small but meaningful projects to promote sustainable, not just projects, but mindsets and actions that can reduce risk to heritage. So these are the 3 simple tools. Really, it's about getting them honing their critical thinking skills, getting them to connect to communities, not just locally, but also regionally. And so for them to think about what's next for them in their local community. Here is one of the photo cards. There's one of the resources inside. You can see the Think, Share, Act framework actually informs all the photo cards. And the first one about think, we're actually using a Seeking Wonder thinking routine that's developed by the Harvard project, at the University of Harvard. And in this project called Project Zero. Here, this thinking routine really quite honed not just the observation skills, but also the thinking skills and problem solving skills of the children. And Share really is taking it global. Yeah, we use various ways to get children to think about, imagine if the waters are all polluted, what would we do? Imagine if the tsunami happened in your community, how would you describe it? But also making it local with the last component of ACT. For example, what are some valuable things in your community that you want to safeguard? Yeah, and this is bringing it really to their own community. Okay, and here inside you also find some pedagogical principles for global citizenship education. We are not just wanting to promote dialogue, but also participation and getting them to look at it through different disciplines. And the multimodal is important, and that's where all the lesson ideas in the toolkit will be helping with that. But also getting them to form certain values of, wanting to appreciate and safeguard their heritage, thinking more deeply about how to prevent certain disasters, certain human-made disasters, and also empowering them to do something locally and making sure that it's applicable and relevant both locally and globally. The 4th chapter is really about teaching and reflecting for actions. This is the chapter where you'll find all the lesson ideas that the educators can innovate on their own. Today, I will only share 2. Yeah, we have this, the lesson ideas are divided into ideas for the younger ones, the 7 to 9. For example, in this case, we look at the case study of a water festival, the Huangdao Pagoda Festival that is celebrated every year for 18 days. And it's a big, big celebration that we want to let everybody know about it and get them to share what other social practices, rituals, or festive events do you have in your own community that you would like to safeguard. And then for ACT, for the younger ones, we really want them to think about, how do they spread awareness about the festival that they love to their own family, to their own community, and to let everybody know it's something that they treasure. And the next example I'd like to share are some lesson ideas for the 10 to 12 years old. They are slightly older, but nevertheless, we're using a real life case study, of a social enterprise near Lake, where they talk about rubbish collection and how they do it in a certain way to reduce waste. And in this case, we want them to really bring it back to their daily life. So they could actually share about, do you know what people in your family or the community usually throw away? And how do they feel about transforming some of these rubbish into useful things? So these are the problem-solving things coming up. And then think about, why the community should recycle or even upcycle. And then for the act phase, it's really to put it into action. Yeah. By doing this, how could they reduce waste? How would they promote responsible consumption and production in their community? Already you can see this little act itself is going into other SDGs about consumption and production. And to end off, I want to talk a little bit about how I did the research. Not all I have visited most of the water heritage research, water heritage sites, but some of them I couldn't. So I got to know the Mokans through an online film and also an online museum called the Mokan Alive Museum. And in this museum that's online, I found many photographs that I used in this toolkit, but I also got to watch a film called about the young people in the Mokan village in Thailand. And in the film, he was interviewed about how he felt about the current situation. And he actually shared how for the Mokans, the ocean is their universe, and how he observed and witnessed the big ships coming to take every fish. And he wonders, what they will do when the ocean is empty. And some of his thoughts about how he wondered if they really do care. And also, does this mean that we have to stop being Mokan? And at this point, I felt very touched by his interview, because it was the water heritage was not just something for his sustainability, for him to catch the fish, but it's also closely tied to his identity. And I just thought for this moment, whether or not we as educators, as policymakers, or even as museum practitioners, we perhaps need to stop and think about what kind of world would we want to leave to our children, and how do we prepare our children for the kind of world that is going to come up next. So with this, I leave you with some of my favorite pictures here from the toolkit, where we can see not just the natural heritage, but also the cultural heritage, and even the intangible heritage of poems, songs, and rituals that have been created by the people who live near these water bodies. Yeah. And I'm also on the YouTube live chat. You can communicate with me there. If you're an educator and you're already using the toolkit, please write to me, tell me how you're using it. If you haven't started using the toolkit, I'm happy to chat and discuss your ideas. And with this, I think my 20 minutes is up. So I'm going to hand everybody over to Ms. Hataya for the question and answer session, which I really am looking forward to.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, for your wonderful presentation, as always. Okay. Actually, there's immediately questions that you can respond. We can also help. From Farah Aslina, she asks, can we get the model or this toolkit? In fact, actually, may I just respond to this question? Then Karen can help to add some more information. Actually, this toolkit can be downloaded from SPAFA and UNESCO FCU website, but we will also download this video soon after we finish this session. And in our the video will be posted in our YouTube channel. And in our YouTube channel, you can find the link to the at the description box. Then you can find the page that you can download these toolkits, which actually now I think we already post 3 languages, but certainly we translated all 6 languages. In case you need other language, please contact us directly. We will try to get the other language for you. And so I think to make it more like relevant, I will go to the questions for Karen before we go back to Gab and Henry. According to these two kids, there's a question like and it's also related to what Karen mentioned about the world heritage and our heritage things. For these two kids, can we adapt the two kids into our own local heritage sites? What do you think? And do you have any suggestions?
Yes, thank you for the question. And in fact, the two activity sheet that you'll find in the toolkit has no relation to any of the water heritage sites that are in the toolkit. You can actually use it for any water heritage near you. It can be a lake, a pond, a river, or any waterfall that is near you, or even for any other cultural heritage that are not related to water. So
Yes.
as educators, I'm sure you appreciate the chance to really innovate and make the lessons relevant for your own class, for your own students. And the toolkit actually encourages that.
May I also add, actually, as Karen mentioned that you can adapt, you can make any use from these toolkits. And if you have a chance to use it somewhere, somehow, please let us know if anything that we should improve, because when we completed this toolkit, unfortunately, it was during the pandemic period. It's the worst period at that time. So we cannot really make a kind of experimental and see how it should be improved, or it already works. So it's really important for us to get your feedback. Then we can further develop for something more like interesting and funner. Okay. And as Karen already mentioned, that you can contact her to the information that she provided anytime. So please feel free to do so. Okay, I go back to the questions for other two speakers. Perhaps we may have a chance to pick up one for each, and if there is more time, then we can see for others, as we have quite a number of questions. Let me go back to Henry. There's I think the question is that from Vulan Danibroto, I'm sorry if I pronounce the name not actually properly. He asks, in recognizing the potential of culture and heritage as a tool for empowerment, how do we ensure that local wisdom is still relevant to be applied today? This is a question for Henry.
Yeah, so I think what I would say, like in this discussion about culture and heritage as a tool, I think it comes down to who is using the tool and who decides what they use it for. So like, as I mentioned before, it can't just be, you know, government decides this, we want this. That doesn't seem to me to be really culture almost at all. So if I can put it in a slightly different way, like, and it also relates to what Karen said there about using the tool, her water heritage tool. So like this pen, this is a tool, but it can't do the writing for me. I have to do the writing, if that makes sense. And what I will write will be culturally determined. And so I think it's quite easy to find tools. So like, you know, there are many tools, like I mentioned, our collections matter toolkit. But what we find is people are often not very clear on what challenge it is they want to address. So you find the tools, but you don't really know what it is that you want to do. And so I think making sure that people have access to tools, including their culture and heritage, but they also have opportunities to talk with other people about what is it that they want to do, because none of this stuff is done alone. And I hope I've answered the question, maybe in a slightly vague way. But like even how we think of culture and heritage is really different in different countries. Like, as I mentioned, in the UK, you know, heritage very much seen as preserving things which have no use from the past. That's one way to think about it, or the much more positive way is to think about it's like, well, it's a tool for building the present and the future that we want. So I think it's quite complicated, but making sure that people at least have an understanding of what their own heritage and that of other people is. And I mean, we can take it from like there's the right to participate in cultural life from the Universal Declaration, Article 27. And it's been kind of defined a bit more clearly in one of these general comments that, you know, everyone should have the opportunity to take part in cultural practices. Everyone should be able to find about their own culture and of other people. And everyone should have the opportunity to contribute to the cultural life of the community. That's a great model. You know, it's like saying that culture also has different aspects. And I hope I've answered the question there, and if not, I'll be happy to try again.
Okay, thank you. I think it's quite clear. The question is quite like a broad in a sense that the answer can be not so specific as to ensure the local wisdom to be applied. It's like needs like a more time, even more hours to think about and explain, because it seems to be, if they need a practical answer, I think we need time to discuss. But what you respond, I think it's really give an idea to answer this question. Okay, we may come back if we have time. But may I go to questions for Gap? It's a question from Raguna Arumugam. I think she mentioned that awareness and commitment to the cause is vital. It has to be an ongoing effort and not seasonal. I think it means like a SDG, something like that. How do you suggest this is done?
Ooh, okay. Commitment to something for a long term is a personal thing, right? So I think for us, maybe I can reflect back to what we do as a team, and I do know that some people have a certain time, you know, that they will be able to commit to a project or a certain thing that they can do to contribute to a bigger cause. But what I see as a continuing commitment is really if knowing what the person really aspires for. Let's say I have 185 members, right? And this 185 members want different things. And to understand that each one has their special needs, they're different parts of their career, they're looking at different aspects of sustainable development. And that is the role that I have, so that I know how much they can engage. So there are some people who really want to learn the bigger process, and those are the people who want to take on board bigger and bigger responsibilities in the long run. And I think the best way to engage is to really understand where the person is coming from and how can they communicate, how can they be better with themselves and believe in a cause for a longer term. Because if they suddenly don't believe in it anymore, then of course they will never engage anymore. So that kind of knowledge is very important. Yeah, motivation.
Okay, thank you. And I'm also have some idea when I saw these questions, like when the viewer asking why it's not just to be the seasonal. I think perhaps for these few years, this SDGs has been like a heavily promoted. So it's like become like all institutes, not only cultural institutes, but all institutes around the world talking about SDGs. So it's become a trend. But I think for the practitioners or people who are encouraged to have some reaction or act, also think, is that just a trend? And then after 5 years or after 2030, it's gone, and what we are doing today will not be actually effect for the future. I think that's perhaps there's many people thinking something about that, right?
Okay, so I think to echo what Henry said earlier as well, is that the SDGs, of course, it is now the current framework, but there will be another framework in the future, right? We want to aspire for better things, to solve the global issues. And I'm sure that after 2030, a new and more ambitious framework will be done. But the real question is, for us in the cultural sector or the heritage sector, for that matter, is that how do you effectively contribute, right? Most of us are really focused on the daily lives or the heritage practice that we have, and not really thinking of the bigger picture. And for us, we have to broaden our own perspective so that we know that there is that piece of the puzzle that we ourselves can contribute. And I think that is important, right? So for every one of us, practitioners, may it be in natural heritage, intangible heritage, cultural heritage, museums and whatnot, we have a piece in it. And then maybe a simple method of, let's say, identifying a good goal of, let's say, improving the economic development around my city, around my heritage site. How can I do that? How can I make the lives of other people better? Maybe that's a starting point of a discussion. So I think it's not just a trend, but we need to know how we can be part of that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Gab. Actually, there are many questions coming. So I think I have to pick up. And I think these questions perhaps for all of you, anyone that like to respond, just like feel free to speak out. Actually, I think I'm going to pick up one question. We may have time for 2 questions. One question comes from Ramwell Tene. The question is that, do you see or feel active engagement among young people from various fields or disciplines who wants to take part in your advocacy apart from those who are involved directly?
I can answer first if you want. There are a lot of people who want to be engaged during the ECOMOS General Assembly in Sydney. Many people did reach out to me, and because they know that there is something that they can do more, right? They want to explore the bigger picture, right? And to be honest, the jobs in the cultural sector, we're actually a marginalized sector. If we're not a doctor, you're not if you're not an engineer, you're not a scientist, then you probably are in a lower paid sector. But the sustainable development sector is a highly paid sector because of the trends that you're saying, and people want to know how can we be involved, right? But I guess knowing your own strengths and knowing how you can be involved is one thing, and to know that channel and to understand that there are things that you can contribute to. For example, innovation. How can cultural heritage be part of innovations in the future? How can we be part of the digital stream? How can we be part of, let's say, better infrastructure development? And these are the types of things that people really want to know. And I think that needs a little bit of training, a little bit of understanding that, yes, we can contribute to all these aspects. And I think that's where young people, those people who are in their early careers, want to understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll answer that. That I think whether or not young people want to be part of sustainable development, they have a right to be, because it's the world, their world that we inhabit, their future. And so understanding the potential and the responsibility that we have, not just to think that cultural institutions have all the answers, that we do things the right way. We also do many things the wrong way. We have to think, well, what are the things that I do that stop everyone from understanding and being able to participate in, you know, a kind of democratic, broader process. So I think it's also about being very realistic and very genuine, that say, well, if there are a group of marginalized people, what am I practically doing to bring them more to the center?
Can I also add that about 2 weeks ago, we have the interfaith rally on climate change in Singapore. And for the first time in many years, we see young people from their different spiritual and religious group coming together, you know, in spite of their different beliefs, and really putting their minds together to think about climate change. And I think that's a good sign. That's like, and we also have interfaith dialogue about climate change and sustainable cities. I think this is a good step forward. It's like start where their interest is, right? So if they're already part of this spiritual groups, and we can actually, you know, bring them in and think about, you know, what are certain things from their perspectives. And I've also visited a group in Sulawesi. I'm very encouraged to see the Green Gospel doing good work there in terms of environmental as well as social and economic development. Yeah, and the same thing it's going on with the Muslim communities in a different part of Sulawesi as well. So very encouraged by that part. Also run by, certain projects were run by young people, certain were run by the elders of the communities. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think from the response from the three speakers, it can really see that in fact the young people, it's like one of the key issue for the achievement in sustainability for humanity. So that's why we have been working with them for a lot. I have a last question, and I think this is also for three of you as well. The questions are from Virgilio. I think he asked, how can cultural diversity be leveraged to promote climate action and sustainability on a global scale? I think that's, please feel free to give your opinion.
I can answer again if you want. Okay, I mean, we're all looking at each other. Okay, but cultural diversity, you know, each of us are coming from a part of the world that have a significant intangible heritage, way of doing things that have, you know, really been there for a long time, right? I often would say that let's say the indigenous people of Australia have lived in a very desert-like environment, that they know that this is, you know, and they in the Philippines, in the northern part of the Philippines, tropical storms happen, that they built stone houses that will mitigate that kind of very hard, difficult storms. But it seems to me that a lot of us have also always relied on the new technologies, new innovations, without understanding that they are already old technologies or old parts of our heritage that can be solutions. So I think to understand that our own diversity, our own knowledge and perspective of the world, of the environment, can be something that can be used for future innovations, and revisiting something, a technology that has been always there, is something that we have to keep, right? We cannot be just one people that is looking at things in one perspective, because we need innovations that are coming from different sides of the world.
Gabriel, I'd like to add that because many of these religions and spiritual beliefs are what we call world religions. Yeah, so there's a lot of potential to think about the the similarities and differences, but also how each of the spiritual beliefs can uphold the SDGs as part of their effort to push communities forward. And also how certain practices can actually benefit people regardless of their spiritual, social, or religious belief. Like there's a lot of talk in sustainable circles about the practice of mindfulness, not just as a spiritual practice, but also as a way to think, be more mindful about our actions and the impact our actions have on cultural and natural heritage. And this is one way of connecting to nature, like what Henry was talking about. And to do that is really a mindful step forward. And I think as we celebrate our diversity, certain common threads also run throughout. And one of that is how we can actually be very focused on the impact of our actions.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to give my reply, I think what I would say is that as well as like looking at cultural diversity is just for people to have more interest or more awareness in the experiences of other people around the world. So like one of the reasons I went to Japan when I was doing I had a traveling fellowship was because like so climate impacts are going to come everywhere. You know, but they will be more or less worse in different parts of the world. And so I went to Japan because it has a very strong culture of preparedness for disaster risk because it faces huge levels of disaster risk. In the UK, people just don't think about this kind of stuff because it's, you know, mild oceanic climate. You just think the government will sort things out. It means people and places are at great risk. We need to learn from other places. But also because as the world changes for good or for, you know, for often for bad, is that the option, you know, people's options are going to change. You know, so we need to make sure people have as many options as possible, which can come from cultural diversity, so that they have the tools to resource their lives and their society in a different world.
Thank you. And actually, I'm completely agree to all of you. And in fact, I think from my own experience, I think SEAMEO SPAFA, ICROM, and ICOMOS, or I think perhaps ICOM. I may not really involved with ICOM, but partially I did know many people from ICOM. We have been promoting the traditional knowledge system for many years, and it's also recognized by people, by organizations working in the field of disaster risk reduction, like a UN ISDR, which also published a book on traditional knowledge that can be used to reduce the impact from disaster as well as climate related disaster. But certainly it's not really widely accepted and also aware. And it's our perhaps mission or our task as the cultural workers to try to bring the cultural diversity and the traditional knowledge or cultural based knowledge into the global level to make people more understand and aware of the importance of this kind of knowledge. And I'm not actually sure after a COP this year, they may have something coming out and perhaps related to the traditional knowledge or related to culture more than other years. And actually there's many questions, and if I'm not sure if there's our guest speakers don't mind, we may send you some questions that if you wish and if you please to answer this question, and then we can send the question to people who ask this question, because there are many questions and I think they really want your response. Yeah.
Can I just add something, Hatia, to what you said there about COP and intangible heritage or so on, traditional knowledge, is that the main framework for the Paris Agreement for the public facing all of society aspect is already agreed. It was agreed in 2021. We just need to use it. It's really, really good. And we need to apply our traditional knowledge and our own institutions and so on to that. Because it's a really great framework. It fits very well with the work of the cultural sector, and certainly traditional knowledge can help to bring that up and make sure it's not just words on a page.
Yes, actually, there's a lot. I also had a chance to try to fight using this traditional knowledge in reducing risk for our cultural heritage sites. It's not so easy, but anyway, I think it's worth that we try our best to bring this to the global society. So I think we have only 1 minute before 4 p.m. Bangkok time. So I need to return the floor back to John, our MC, for him to give a closing remarks or close the event. And thank you very much for all viewers and also speakers. Hopefully, we will have a chance to invite you to join our events in the future, particularly the physical events. And thank you very much until we meet again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Hatea, for moderating the session, and to all our viewers for joining us, and to all our speakers, Henry, Gabriel, and Karen. Thank you for sharing your experiences in culture and how it relates to sustainability. And thank you to SEAMEO SEPS for co-organizing this webinar with us, SEAMEO SPAFA. SEAMEO SEPS, this is actually a series in their SDGs webinar. So be sure to join session 3. We actually have a slide for their next. Yep, so their next webinar is on the 1st of November. Be sure to join. It's on the topic of transforming education to a brighter future. And it's at the same time from 2 p.m., starting at 2 p.m. And there's a QR code there where you can scan to pre-register. And pre-registration is free. So be sure to join session 3, Transforming Education to a Brighter Future. And thank you to those who contributed in the chat box through discussions and questions. We really like seeing that. And we have selected the 2 lucky winners who will be receiving the SPAFA souvenirs based on their participation through the questions. And we'll be in contact with them shortly. And we have more good news for our viewers. We know a lot of you love getting your certificates, and I actually saw in the chat box some people already asking about certificates. And normally for SPAFA sessions, we don't give out certificates, but for this SPAFA sesh, because it's in collaboration with SEAMEO SEPS, you are able to attain a certificate, but you need to complete the post-webinar evaluation and e-certificate validation form. And the slide is on the screen on how to get the e-certificate of participation. You need to scan the QR code, and please be aware of points 1, 2, 3, and 4. You need to complete this evaluation form by the 12th of October, which is next Thursday. And then there's also a deadline in terms of the time. So please make sure you do it before that date and time. Also, please double check the name, the spelling of your name, because once the e-certificate has been done, we will not be accepting any corrections. So please make sure that you put in your correct, you type in carefully your name. And point 4, the e-certificates will be posted on the Facebook page, SEPS Webinar 2003. And last but not the least, be on the lookout for the opening of registrations for you to join SEAMEO SPAFA's 2024 International Conference in Archaeology and Fine Arts, SPAFACon 2024, which is going to happen in Bangkok next year in June, and catch the early bird rates. So thank you once again to all our viewers, speakers, and see you next time. Bye.